City Council meeting of February the 3rd, 2020 to order at this time. If you would please everyone rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, as you can see, we do have a quorum for this evening. Are there any agenda additions, deletions, amendments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I'm trying to find my agenda here.
I can just do it if you're still looking for it.
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor, from the consent agenda, could we remove item C, resolution R1520, and move it to new business tonight?
Seconded.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor? Aye. Nays? Motion carries.
Mr. Mayor, I'd also like that I'd also like to move that the Amber Ridge detailed site plan and the preliminary site plan are moved off the agenda for tonight in old business.
Mr. Mayor.
It's been moved.
Second. I'd like to second that.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor?
A question on the motion, I apologize. So we want to completely remove these items from the agenda?
Yeah, for tonight, correct.
Okay.
Indefinitely.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Mayor, could you make a statement? Could you make a statement? As to why we should have our zoning authority.
Okay.
Because that's what we would have had. We would have stopped this had we had it.
I get what you're saying.
You follow what I'm saying?
I get you. I won't leave them to do that
Because
because
they don't quite understand what happened. Some of the residents don't understand what happened.
yeah.
Yeah. That's why.
I think I'll take a
You want to do
point of clarification and a point of privilege here. One of the challenges we face here with the City Council is when it comes to zoning, we don't have the final say-so in what happens in our city and immediately around it. So please understand that part of what we're trying to do is we need to continue to fight and try to get zoning for ourselves. And there are certain things that once it gets past a certain point, we really have absolutely no say-so on it. And as a sitting body, we have to also make sure that we make decisions and say things that follow the proper protocol and procedure. So once things reach a point, no matter what we vote, we can't stop them. As an example, if they meet the letter of the law, if they meet the detailed site plans and other things, once it gets past to that point, we can't stop it. But we also want to make sure that we don't encourage anything that doesn't support our being able to have our own decision process in zoning, but also in making sure that we do what's right for the citizens of Bowie. And so know that that's a part of why what you just saw happen. And it was the best way for us at this time to address the issue. Anyone would like to comment as well?
Mr. Mayor, I just add that I encourage everybody who's watching online tonight and who's here with us who wants to talk about Amber Ridge to talk to the county, to talk to the planning board, because that's where the final decision is going to be made. So the fight isn't over if this is something that you're passionate about, but please go talk to the county and the planning board and make your voice heard there.
Yes, sir. Back. Yes, sir. Pardon me. You with your hand up, if you would go to the city clerk, you have to sign in if you need to. Oh, okay, then we might.
But there's no hearing. You guys removed it, so.
Would it be possible
So-
to move those folks to just have them speak under regular citizen participation?
Yes.
We can just double that
Okay.
list for regular participation if we want.
Yeah, and I think we go now to citizen participation. If you haven't signed or if you have signed, you're still welcome to come forward and state your piece as well. Is there anyone who?
State your name.
Okay, wait, before, we've got other people signed up first. I'm sorry. Okay, so this is Ms. Linda Cooper, and she's with the Girl Scouts, so they're all gonna come up at one time,
Okay.
so, you know. And then these are the two that have signed up for Amber Ridge.
So
So
these
let's
will
do
all
these
come up
first.
here.
Yes,
Okay.
because the girls need to go home to go.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Linda Cooper? Good evening, all of you.
Good evening, Mayor and the City Council. My name is Linda Cooper, and I'm a member of the City of Bowie Green Team, and I'm very happy to have some Girl Scouts with me this evening to encourage you, the City Council, to think deeply about funding a nature center and an environmental study area in the City of Bowie. These young people want to learn more about how local government works, and this was an opportunity for representative members of two troops to share some thoughts with you. I especially thank Ms. Marie Shadline, who is the leader of the troop, for her work in making this happen, and she's the grandmother of some of these girls. And I was her daughter's Girl Scout leader, so, you know, Girl Scouts is a family thing, and we just keep growing the family. The girls are going to speak now in support of a presentation you'll hear later tonight from Mr. Deary Allen in regard to the next 10 steps toward a greener Bowie. They want to be part of a greener future for all of us and all of that surrounds us in nature. The bedtime calls for them long before we're going to be out of here. And so they will speak now in the public participation time, and I thank you very much for listening.
We're here to tell you about the birds and the bees. We need to know about the flowers and the trees. We have to learn about the mountains and the seas. You need to help us, won't you please?
Make us a place to learn about these birds, bees, flowers, trees. Trails in the forest to explore, yes please. I need the world needs me. Help us please.
Build us a place to learn, you see, a nature center truly.
Where we can all come, see, and learn about our earth and the things that be, from the grandmas to the kids that are 2 or 3.
Let the children lead you to a learning tree from harm and pollution to keep the earth free. So this great good place will always be the land we love from sea to sea.
On my honor, I would try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law.
I would like to say thank you to all of you for coming here this evening and not only enlightening us, but helping to enlighten all of our community. Thank you again so much.
Thank you for allowing us to come.
Thank you for coming.
Rosario, And you know? Huh? Ideal.
I'm here.
Hey, bud.
You know,
I'm here. I'm here. I've been here for 30 years. I'm not going to miss a day. I'm kind of sorry that you're not going to have the hearing on it, but I have a question. Since you have taken it off discussion, are you going to have a representative at the hearing, at the planning board hearing Thursday to represent your views?
I think. What's that?
Go ahead.
City staff, just for clarification, has the county's already heard this, right?
No, it's not.
Okay, that's at 6, right?
The planning board hearing for the subdivision is this Thursday.
Is this Thursday? Thank you.
And the site plan has not been accepted yet.
Okay.
So will there be a representative at the hearing Thursday?
We plan on going down there
Yes.
and you know, bring the council's message down to the meeting on Thursday for the subdivision.
But you will be there.
We'll be there.
Okay, okay. Because it's very important that you get your views known to the planning board, that it really needs that traffic light and the crossover, because without it, it's going to be very detrimental to Bowie's infrastructure in that area, because it'll put extreme hardships on the streets in that area, and it will really, well, I have it here, but it's too long to talk in the participation. But anyway, the thing to remember is that if the general counsel told the planning board at one time, and I was there at the time, he told them that their first concern was the safety of Prince George's County citizens. And if you have the safety of the city of Bowie residents in your mind, then you should oppose this development and not let it go. And you should require them to put the traffic light and the crossover in. And if we can get them to do that, then whoever contests it, let them take it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Alvita Addison.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for taking the position that you did and using this strategy in order to, I guess, strengthen our position. You mentioned that you wanted us to go and deal with our issues with development with the county. So I'm interested in doing that, but I don't know if there's a concerted effort or coordinated effort that's coming from our council. And if there is, I would like to volunteer, or if anyone in this group has an effort or an organization that is leading the way, I would like to be a part of that. But thank you very much. So if you could ask my question, is there any?
Thank you.
Is there any?
Yeah, there is different organizations that are opposing the development.
Okay.
I'll be very candid. I myself have gone down to the county council and voiced my opposition to developments here and near the area. And personally, I plan to continue to do that.
Okay. So Thursday is the next date that we should go down and try to voice our concern, or where? Thursday.
When is the next meeting?
The planning board will hear the Amber Ridge subdivision this Thursday.
Correct.
At the county administration building, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, okay. I'll see if I can get someone else to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, if you reach out to us, we can also get you the email addresses and contact information of the relevant county council people to talk to. You can talk to the city manager, or you can email any one of us during and after the meeting, and we'll get back to you with their information. Yep.
Okay. Moving right on the agenda. Outside of what was originally planned, the city clerk, do we have any presentations?
No, sir.
No presentations, okay. I guess we need to do the appointments. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to appoint Alita Gary Carter to the Education Committee.
Second?
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor? Aye. Nays? Motion carries. Please. She here? Is she here? Okay. There you are. All right.
There you go.
If you would raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, Alita Carter,
Do swear or affirm
do swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States,
and that I will be faithful
and that I will be faithful
and bear true allegiance
and bear true allegiance
to the state of
to
Maryland
the state of Maryland,
and support
and support
the Constitution
the Constitution
and laws thereof,
and laws thereof,
and that I will,
and that I will,
to the best of my skill and judgment,
to the best of my skill and judgment,
diligently and faithfully,
diligently and faithfully,
without partiality or prejudice,
without partiality or prejudice,
execute the office of regular
execute the office of regular
member of the,
member of the Education Committee,
according to the Constitution
according to the Constitution
and the laws of this state.
and the laws of the state.
Congratulations. There you go. Come up and get this. Come forward. Please come forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for volunteering today. We really appreciate it.
Congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
For
much.
supporting your community.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the family.
Do we have any council announcements? Any announcements?
No.
Okay. I'd like the city manager's report at this time.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, and residents, currently the city staff is decisively engaged in the budget preparation. As tomorrow, we'll be reviewing the community services budget proposals in preparation for a submission of a budget to you all in the first week in April. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for city manager? Let's move to the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to move to approve items A, B, and D on the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the old business, approval of ordinance 0120.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item under old business is for consideration of repealing and reenacting Chapter 2, Administration of the Public Ethics Ordinance. The purpose of this, the city's ethics law is derived from state law, and there was a change in state law associated with the ethics ordinance. What this ordinance does is it accomplishes two things. It amends our ordinance to reflect that home addresses would not be subject to public disclosure with the when freedom of information requests, public records requests are made of ethics documents. And the second item is associated with the creation of a new Schedule H under the financial disclosure statement that would require filer's spouse, if the spouse is a regulated lobbyist, to be included on that financial disclosure.
Question for staff, Mr. Mayor? So just in layman's terms, so I understand. So we're just updating our ethics rules to be in line with the state's new requirements, and the two principal requirements we're changing are that we're not going to disclose people's personal addresses for safety reasons, but we will disclose if somebody's married to a lobbyist.
That's correct.
Awesome, thank you.
Good. Any other questions?
And no, I'm not married to a lobbyist, just to be very clear. I would like to move to approve ordinance O-1-20.
Second.
Oh.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor? Aye. Nays? Motion carries. As we move to new business. Update on environmental initiatives. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Let me start off by simply noting that your agenda is very different than I had anticipated. We looked at the agenda that you had previously printed and saw that we were going to be late after what we anticipated were some lengthy discussions about a specific development plan. And in anticipation of that, under public participation, Linda signed up the Girl Scouts. So they kind of give you a preamble for what I'm going to be talking about the environment. Later on, we had anticipated having some preschoolers here, but since we thought that the hour would be late and we'd be closer to 9:30 or 10 o'clock, it looked kind of like a bad time to bring preschoolers to here. But I guarantee you, in the weeks ahead, you'll be hearing more about from the young children here in Bowie about some of the things I'm going to be talking about this evening. So let me simply say, good evening again. It's my privilege as chairman of the EAC, your Environmental Advisory Committee, to come before this council each year to talk about recommendations for the coming fiscal year. And this year, they're particularly bold and challenging because the seriousness of the situations that we think face both this community, the region, the country, and the planet. And we're not without precedent in this area because we've been talking about some of these issues for quite some time. Just 4 years ago, and I call your attention now to the screen, citizens gathered to help imagine what Bowie could be like in the years ahead. And subsequent to that decision, we listened to over 125 citizens gathered over Ken Hill Center. Many of them contributed details to that discussion. And subsequently, with the support of staff and other citizens, that fall in 2016, this council adopted a strategy to implement a sustainability plan. We're looking at some of the details of that still this evening, and I'll call, before I'm finished, your attention to a couple of those details. But now, on behalf of the Environmental Advisory Committee, I invite you to reflect on what we call annually the next 10 steps to a greener Bowie. So I'm going to highlight 10 specific recommendations that build on that plan, that highlight the earlier work that's been done, but each of these are designed to enhance the quality of life in this community and to help bring into conformity some of the recommendations and objectives that you yourselves talked about just a couple months ago in the election process. You know, many local governments today face many challenges. You guys articulated the over 20, nearly 25 candidates that were running at that time articulated a great many different challenges, and you've been dealing with a few of them since your election in terms of tax rates and transportation and the need for strong economic growth and good education choices, which more than half the candidates articulated details on during that process. But from our perspective, from the perspective of those of us who are concerned about the environment, the defining issue of the next generation of leadership is actually climate change or global warming. That is to look at the implications for the kind of headlines you read about every day and see in the newspapers, and look at the local actions that are required to help address those things. Because while it may seem like the crisis is elsewhere, in the Amazon or the Arctic or in Australia, the truth of it is the impacts and therefore the opportunities to act are right here in this community. And we'll talk about some of the changes that are going on, because to start with, you all know the environment's changing. You can't really look at the newspaper or watch television in the evening without recognizing that almost every other story deals with some aspect of the changes that are going on in our planet with respect to the fact in the last decade, we've seen the warmest 10 years since people started recording data about any of this. What are the implications of that for local actions? Because communities can lead or they can simply step aside. Here's the opportunity for us to look at what we can do. We know public concern is growing in this area, and we know there's impacts all around the planet, including right here in this community. So our first, our highest, our number one, our A recommendation is that the city adopt a 5-year climate action plan to reduce greenhouse gases right here in this community based on documented levels of greenhouse gas emissions from the city and from its citizens to 50% below the 2018 levels by 2030. That can only happen if we develop a plan on how to do it, and so within 1 month, we will in March provide you with the first municipal climate action plan ever produced in both this county and this state. So you'll have a chance to see exactly what this team of my colleagues who are gathered here this evening from the Green Team and the EAC and others who come this evening, and we would add a bunch of citizens and kids speak at this particular point and stand up and say, rah, rah. We brought a few of the signs that they bear.
There you go.
Because we think that this is one of the most important actions you'll take, not just to receive the plan, but to look at its recommendations, because ultimately what we want you to do is take those recommendations for greenhouse gas reduction and show how they conform to our growth projections in the coming years, so that basically we not only look at the transportation impacts of growth, we look at the school impacts of growth, but we're going to look at the greenhouse gas impacts of growth as well. And it becomes one of the articles of faith as we go forward. So every developer has to anticipate that question, we hope from your side of the table, saying in a sense, all right, if this goes forward, what will be its impact on greenhouse gas emissions here in our community? Just take that step a little bit further, and you've already begun to move. I'm so pleased about this, because back on January the 6th, you passed, as a part of your consent agenda that evening, you took an action on the solar farm, which had been kind of tied up in bureaucratic red tape, as you know, for some time. But that evening you approved it. And it's our hope that in 2020, at some point, you'll actually have the opportunity to attend a ceremony in which there will be a groundbreaking, and we'll be able to move this project forward. And that's the record of achievement, a first step, like the resolution you passed also that evening, setting up the next year is Earth Year here in Bowie, is also a first step. So we've begun as a group of citizens to plan how that might be implemented as well. So the installation's a first step, the resolution's a first step, and these design standards, because as a city will as a basis for approval for all new development and redevelopment, require applicants to certify that their project conforms to your adopted greenhouse gas goals that we want citizens. So they know, citizens can be confident that the judgments you're making will make this community a healthier place to live in the future. All of that is simply a part of what euphemistically is called a master plan. A master plan is more than simply a land use plan. It has to look at a lot of other different features. Transportation is one of the conundrums you're going to face in virtually every one of these. But now greenhouse gas becomes a new wrinkle in looking at that. So we want, and we will encourage you over the next 2 years that this process begins to develop to protect green infrastructure, to restore stream water quality, and ultimately to help protect the ecological features of this community as a part of your work on those plans. Unfortunately, those plans are frequently developed outside the confines of this particular chamber. But as you pointed out earlier, you can make recommendations. And while you may not be the final authority in these things, those recommendations do carry weight when they carry the unanimous voice of this council forward. And we have a record as a community, as you well know, of raising the bar consistently over the last 3 decades on this. I urge you to continue, as we've structured here, and looked at options to raise that bar and continue to call forth from the development community a higher standard for the quality of life in this county and particularly in this community. A part of that, if I don't get too far ahead of myself after the master plan, is to establish a children's natural exploration area. Now, this is a thing that we've actually promoted for 5 straight years. It's a modest investment, costing less probably than $10,000. But all of us get concerned about the fact that kids go around staring at screens all the time. There's ways to address that issue with parents and young children by simply providing an easy, accessible mechanism to get them outdoors in our parks. We have organized recreation and sports. We have trails and paved walkways. There needs to be some way they can go out and actually experience nature without having to walk on a paved surface. That's what Introduction to Nature is all about. Communities across the country are doing this kind of thing. The state has a plan for helping to support this in local communities. So here's a way that we could do this in one of our local parks. And by the way, I just want to point out that it would be an ideal asset for the racetrack site because that immediately adjacent to the river, the Patuxent River, and is a good spot to actually consider doing a natural exploration area in this, in that area. And in addition to that, on that same site or others, you could assess the value and benefits of construction of a nature center. But I must admit, as one that's very close to my heart to see this, and you saw the Girl Scouts talking about it, if we were to actually do this, I think we ought to at least consider a platinum level building. That's the highest green standard the state has available. It is likened to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's home site in Annapolis that we could do that. So if we're going to build a building, let's build a building set to a high standard that actually shows citizens the best example of new building techniques that are out there. But of course, it doesn't begin with construction. It begins with the assessment of the value and benefit of such a structure here in our community. And such a study to determine that, again, is a modest investment, probably less than $25,000 to get it off the ground. So these amenities, like the ones the Girl Scout talked about and I spoke about, would be used, we think, widely. They're not expensive. They could be sited and installed in a local park. They're early things, cheap things, that ultimately you could do in the coming fiscal year. Number 6, for the last 2 years, your staff has had an ongoing pilot program for curbside pickup of compost among residents. We've been running it for some 200 residents throughout the community. It's time we looked at the benefits and impact of that particular pilot. and gave staff the option over the next 2 years of expanding that pilot and looking at a way in which we might expand it to the entire community within the next 2 years. That can be done. Again, I'm interested in solutions, not simply making recommendations. Prince George's is one of the pace setters in composting in the entire state. So let's develop a contract with them that they will take this waste and use or better yet, let's emulate the example they've set and set up such a site on part of our own public works properties. The options are there. The costs are reasonable. The benefits are obvious because we get it out of the waste stream and it doesn't go into the landfill. This is something we can all do, and by the way, every citizen can see that it's a potential broad citizen benefit for our community to do this, and it's doable within just 2 years. And the cost, again, isn't overwhelming. Depending on which particular estimate you look at, and I urge you to talk to George about it during the budget, he's your public works director, I think you can do this for several $100,000. And I'll speak at the end about money. But of course, if you're going to do that, you need to accompany that with an aggressive public education campaign on recycling. One of the most interesting things that's happened in the last 3 years is a dramatic change in what goes into recycling and the recycling markets throughout the United States, as China has withdrawn from the recycling market in the traditional role they played for the previous 2 decades. As that's changed, many citizens are still confused about what can go in, what's compostable in the recycling containers, and the fact that nowadays it has to be much cleaner than it used to be, or it ought to be treated differently, or it will be treated differently. The data says that over 80% of the material currently going into those blue containers is ultimately recyclable or compostable. That means it doesn't have to go in the landfill. Again, a cost savings can be achieved from the landfill reduction cost, but partly that can only be done by helping citizens better understand what can and cannot be recycled and what the conditions are for it. Each citizen and each community must take a part. The good news about the Green Earth Year resolution you just passed is that our committee, along with the Green Team, is dedicated to helping identify all the steps, more than 100 steps citizens can take in this particular process. We've called it Commit, Acts of Green. With your help and with the city's outreach and website, we think we can do a better job of communicating to citizens what these acts are and how they can do it as a part of changing their lifestyle for the decade ahead. This is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, but it's simply the first time we've looked seriously at calling it and celebrating it an entire year. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to do that as a part of the resolution you passed just last month. These next 4 steps are going to be the oldest and most challenging that the committee's ever put before at council. The next one has to do with how to staff for sustainability. It's one thing for the EAC, and I'll mention this again a little bit later, we've made more than 100 recommendations to councils over the last decade. Each year I come up and we talk about the next 10, just like this time. It's now time to look at what are some of the things that help make these things real. And the first one is we have to staff a little bit differently to make this happen. To staff sustainability, we think initially you need at least 3 new positions. The first one is you need a sustainability officer. It turns out more than 110 communities across the United States have either a resilience or a sustainability officer. There are 2 of them in some of our sister municipalities right here in Montgomery County. In Rockville and Gaithersburg have sustainability officers, and we frequently get compared in the top 5 or 6 communities to those. Here's an area where we're different, but we should be similar. The sustainability officer is a person that actually reports to the city manager, but they're responsible for planning and coordinating efforts in every department to bring together a unified picture of what a city can accomplish, instead of each department kind of doing its thing on its own. The next step would be a social media outreach specialist. This is someone who can help the city take better advantage of social media as a way to communicate what green living is all about in the future. Now, I'm sure they'll get assigned other duties as well, but the bottom line is we want the city to be the front line for helping educate our citizens about what lifestyle changes to live more responsibly on the planet might be in the future. And finally, last year, the council very positively developed and passed a complete streets policy, and it also adopted a trails master plan. But what it didn't do is staff the implementation of that plan with a multimodal transportation specialist whose job it is to look at how these two plans can be more successfully coordinated with our transportation goals as a community. Well, it's one thing to have a plan over here and a plan over there and a transportation over here that's confined to certain particular development proposals, but wouldn't it be better if we had a staff person sitting in the back of the room when things come up and tell you how they all work together, so that ultimately citizens can find a way to walk, ride, talk, and drive on the streets in a safe manner? That's what it is. It's about integrating all the different transportation options in light of the commitments the city has already made, and finding a way to staff and help citizens and the council ultimately better understand what the implications of such policy are as new decisions come forth and policy. Now, we recognize that simply having staff, and those are simply 3 small changes, we could recommend others, but we thought we'd start small. We need a better educated staff. What we have found in finance, public works, communications, refuge, recreation, in almost every area in which the city exerts a major responsibility, those particular professions have a growing edge about all the changes going on in the environment today. And what we'd like the city to do is make a positive effort to have our staff better educated in their particular professional development as a part of their continuing education and training in these particular areas. You want to have capable, competent, confident, and ultimately up-to-date staff in each of these areas. Too often, staff think they already are well-educated in all these areas, but I think if they will attend some of the new cutting-edge conferences and techniques and tools that are available, they'll quickly find there's some ideas out there that other communities are trying out that are very different than those that are presently being implemented right here in our city. Too often, we're comfortable in patting ourselves on the back about the way things are, when in fact, we could do better. Bottom line, if we want to do better, if we want a better trained staff, if we want a staff that's organized better to be sustainable, then ultimately we've got to hold ourselves, and you want to be able to hold them accountable for this. So we encourage you to take the sustainability plan and things like these objectives that you have adopted and talked about, ultimately a part of your evaluation of Mr. Lott each year. So that in addition to looking at whether or not he kept a balanced budget, whether or not he spent the money wisely, whether or not the police force continued to mature and to grow and be healthy, that in fact we're also looking at whether or not some of the sustainability objectives were accomplished. It's not an unreasonable request to say, oh, by the way, how did we do on the sustainability plan? And to ask him to provide some measure of response to that based on what staff's accomplished in the previous year. I think had we had that kind of accountability, we would have long since seen this particular children's exploration area. For in fact, I've heard commitments from both councils and city managers for going on 5 years about this idea, saying it was a fine idea, not that expensive, but somehow we just managed never to get it over the finish line. We never managed to make the touchdown. Let's see if we can do it in the coming year. Remember, it's not that expensive a thing to do. The 10th step is the toughest, because I recognize you can't hire staff, you can't do training, you can't talk about growth and development without talking about funding sustainability. I've sat where you sit, on that side of the table, making decisions about budget and tax rates for nearly a decade. And I recognize that there are a lot of tensions that surround the decisions you're making on this kind of thing. And it requires a kind of a delicate balance between the expectations of citizens for predictability and not too exorbitant requests, and the continuing demand for services and quality of life improvements that others of us keep talking about. Talking about money isn't comfortable. We recognize that. But we also recognize that a flat tax rate may be good politics, and we've had one for over a decade, but frankly, it's not leadership. What it does affect by simply saying you want to keep everything the way it has been for a decade, it ties your hands. And I'll simply say to you point blank, it ties your hands in a way in which you needn't do, because what it does, it makes you vulnerable to the very community you want to least be responsive to, and that's the development community. Because the only way to grow your tax base, if you refuse to look at the tax rate itself, is to look at whether or not the economic base will grow through economic growth. And when they come forth and say, we offer this, this, and this, and that's the implications, then you're put in the awkward position of immediately saying, we have to be open to even a bad idea, because we want to see it to grow our tax base. There's also a tension between that growing and changing or non-changing tax rate and ultimately the reserve. I sat again, as I said, where you've said it, I can tell you right now, the reserve is one of the most valuable financial tools you have as a council, particularly if you do not have planning and zoning authority. If we didn't have the reserve, you wouldn't have the Bowie Bay Sox, because the county wasn't really willing to bring a baseball team to this county, but the city stepped forth and said it would pay for it. And the minute we simply made that commitment back in the 90s, the county suddenly found that that was a good idea. It would have enormous economic repercussions for this particular area and leverage multi-million dollars worth of investment, and it did. But it only began because this city was willing to take its reserve and put it on the line to buy a baseball stadium. And we put more than half the reserve in discussion in a single conversation. We did the same thing with the Center for the Performing Arts. For 17 years, this council sat before the school board and lobbied them to build an auditorium on the school. And they simply said, well, it was always in the CIP, but it never made number one. Finally, we said, we'll do it. We put money on the table. We took the reserve, and in a single conversation, we put $1 million on the table. The following month, we put another $1 million on the table. These are discussions you don't even have much anymore. But what happened? Citizens stepped forth. The county stepped forth. The state stepped forth. And the first thing you know, within 2 years, we had a really nice Center for the Performing Arts. And we had risked, ultimately, only the initial cost of putting an idea on the table because we were willing to pay for it. It turned out to be a much better thing than we could afford, or were willing to pay for it to start with. Much better, because everybody else said and suddenly realized the benefits. Those are bold actions that your predecessors have taken. You can do the same thing. The reserve is why you have a fantastic bond rate that allows the Lats Council to go forth with things like an ice rink center. As a matter of fact, that bond rate and that reserve are what built this building during an economic depression at more than $2 million under its initial estimated cost. Guys, I'm telling you, keep in mind, a flat rate tax is not necessarily good government, and drawing down the reserve to some artificial percentage is not necessarily responsible government. That's the tools you need to govern successfully in a community where you have a growing need, a growing set of expectations, and no substantive authority to control future economic growth. You need that flexibility. Don't tie your hands. Think boldly in the future. These are bold actions we're asking you to take, consistent with your commitment to the adoption of the sustainability plan. They represent, I think, a reflection of your vision and the benefits to local leadership that you yourselves articulated when you ran for the office whose seat you now hold. As I recommended, we've made 100 of these recommendations. About half of them have been implemented, and it's made this city one of the leaders throughout the whole state in the environmental community. The things we've talked about here today are a bold record of achievement that you'll be able to stand on when you seek re-election 4 years from now. There are a couple others I'd highlight just before I leave you, simply because there are 2 others that are really cheap, that are low-hanging fruit. One only costs about $5,000. Styrofoam lasts 500 years in the landfill. We ought to get it out of the landfill. And the easy way to do that is create containers where people can drop them off and where the public works crews don't have to figure out how to sort them out at the curbside or what a citizen can do for them. Interestingly enough, the industry that's responsible for developing these is located less than 2 miles from here. And they're very interested in working with communities to pilot this. And they themselves have on their site one of these particular recycling containers. And they'll show it to you and do it. We can do 3 of these, one north, south, and central, and have citizens drop these off and work out a contract with that industry to pick it up and recycle it. They've been to see us, they'll come to see you. Let's move ahead, it's cheap. What about the green fleets idea? We ought to begin, you will make decisions in your budget cycle about investing in equipment and transportation that'll last a decade. And I've just talked about setting greenhouse goals for a decade. It's time to look at setting realistic purchasing decisions that look at the lifespan cost of a vehicle, not merely the first upfront capital cost of that vehicle. That is a misleading number. And frankly, communities across the entire region through the Council of Governments are banding together to find new ways to purchase more carbon-free vehicles. We can set many examples. Your department, for example, your code enforcement, 5 vehicles, they ought to all be electric next year, in my opinion. Just one particular easy example. What about sustainable procurement? Obviously a low-hanging fruit. Almost every major business as you patronize probably looks at green purchasing. Interestingly enough, the city doesn't have a green purchasing program that's department-wide. Each department is kind of on its own. We need to fix that. We need to get some common ground for everybody on commonly used supplies and equipment. Together, these steps constitute a path forward. They will provide a record of achievement for the city and for each of you. And frankly, I think they'll enhance the natural values of our community. They are the next steps in creating a cleaner and greener Bowie. And they will change the ways you serve citizens if we but take an example of just a few of them, particularly toward the end. We strongly encourage, as I do each year, you to act boldly to define the issues about the next generation. That's why we brought kids here in the beginning. That's why I'll bring kids here in the future, because it's the kids we're talking about. I want to thank you very much for your opportunity to speak before you, and I want to mention one last thing in closing. Simply because we're talking in our 10th recommendation about recommendations that amount to about the cost of 1 cent on the tax rate. Now, before everybody goes ballistic about adding a penny to the tax rate, let's talk about that, because that's the equivalent of $2.72 per house per month in Bowie. That's about half the price of this cup of coffee. That's the impact to buy everything I've talked about here this evening. It's not overwhelming. It's reasonable, and it's a cheap investment for the future. Put 1 cent down on our future. Act boldly. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'd be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you so very much, particularly for your passion for our children and for our future.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
Sue.
I'm Sue Lavera. Good evening, all.
Hello, Sue.
The little children who would like to be here drew you pictures to encourage you for all that Gary just said. So I'll pass them, I'll give them to Michael and he can pass them down. Please keep one on your desk. Remember, little people do know what's going on differently than we do, but they now expect it.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead.
I got a couple of things. First of all, thanks so much, Sue and Gary and the Green Team and the AC and all of you for being here today. I'm going to hand these over real quick. So first of all, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, former Mayor Allen, not only for your past service to the city, but for what you've been doing with the city's environmentalist groups now for over, what, 3 decades approaching, if not?
Long time. Yes, I've been doing this for a long time.
A long time. I've said this before.
Over 30 years.
I don't mind saying it again at this meeting. Of all the various groups and committees we have in Bowie, I don't think there are any that have been quite as active, as successful, or as effective in implementing their goals as yours. And I've attended many of your meetings, and that's in no small part because of the wonderful leadership that you have and the tremendous participation you have, but also because of the broad-based community support that you enjoy. This is an issue that Bowie residents care about, and so whenever there's someone speaking on behalf of environmental causes in the city, I tend to perk up because I know that they're speaking not only with tremendous leadership working with them, but with the broad enthusiasm and support of a lot of residents. That's really all I had for you. I actually did have some questions for staff that I wanted to just ask, but I can pass it off to my colleagues if they wanted to ask you anything directly.
Well, thank you, Mike, and appreciate your support for these initiatives in the past.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Ingrid.
Thank you so much. Your passion is wonderful, and these are some great initiatives. One question, are there grants available to cover some of the costs for these? Have you looked into grant funding outside of?
The answer is for some initiatives in specific areas, like, for example, I don't know what the governor is presently doing, but under Governor O'Malley, I must admit I'm not up on what Governor Logan's doing. There were funds available for the natural exploration areas and the planning of such things, okay? Just as a small example. There are perhaps other incentives. The committee would be pleased to work with staff on helping to identify some of those.
Okay. And outside of the racetrack site, where would you see the natural exploration area going?
Well, obviously, I see it along the river, and if you don't mind, I'd like to address just a moment on the racetrack, because I know you've had public testimony and meetings. I've actually attended those meetings. The one over at Ken Hill Center had over 200 citizens, and you guys were very patient listening to us and them for a couple hours. Let me point out to you, as you think about that $378 million proposal involves not only the transfer of property to Baltimore and Laurel and ultimately perhaps to Bowie, which is what I fully support, but remember, in each case, those jurisdictions get revenue from that settlement and that bond bill that's being proposed to help improve that infrastructure. I urge this council to insist, as a part of a settlement here, that the city get at least 2% of that investment for its infrastructure improvements on the racetrack property. That way you would have the resources with which to develop a nature center, with which to develop maintain the racetrack itself for future public access for the riding community, if that's what you decided, or Bowie State's improvement access to it between that site and Bowie State to help cement that. Otherwise, the property becomes kind of, in my judgment, a kind of a capital asset albatross in which you've now got it. Now you've got to figure out how to come up with the money to improve it or do any of the things that you forecast you'd like to use it for. But by simply saying, hey, if we're going to do this and take it over and administer it, it's not unreasonable that the community and the partnership that ultimately ends up with it gets about 2% of that product. I don't think that's an unreasonable demand or expectation to place in a part of the negotiations. That would give you about $8 million. more than enough to do what I've talked about on that side, and also many of the things that citizens have advocated for on it as well. So think about it as more than simply a property transaction. Think about it as a future asset for the community and how you might use it and develop it.
Okay, thank you.
Hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, if there weren't any more questions for Mr. Allen, I did have some questions related to his presentation to staff real quick. If that's okay? Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. City Manager, I understand that with White Marsh Park, there were some renovations going on there, and that a nature center was actually currently being considered as potentially one of the additions at White Marsh Park. I don't know if that's accurate at all.
That's inaccurate, sir. There's no nature center being.
Okay, that's something that we can bring up in budget then. I know that in our last year's budget, we directed staff to start taking a look at our equipment replacement and acquisition as it related to trying to find areas where we could get electric or hybrid vehicles where we weren't using them already. I just wanted to make sure that that was something that was in fact being looked at. There were some initial buying costs in some cases, but potential long-term savings related to not having to do quite as much maintenance on the fully electric and hybrid vehicles.
Well, we do look at the initial purchase cost and the cost of maintenance over the lifetime of the vehicle. And we are looking into hybrids and electrical vehicles and to see when and where we can afford to do that. Okay. Without increasing the tax rate or using.
And this is something that staff is prepared to talk about in budget, I take it?
Oh, yes.
Wonderful. For the multimodal expert, I know this is something that we brought up in past budgets. I take it we're going to be looking at that again in this budget potentially?
Well, currently, we have no objective in the budget that I could use to justify the hiring of that person or requesting that person. Right now, that's not something under consideration unless the council produces an objective or I'm assigned an objective where I would need a multimodal specialist. Currently, I do not with the current objectives.
Okay. One of the legitimate downsides to multimodalism is that because we have so little control over so many of the roads in our area, I know this is something that I've talked to Joe about, that there could be a room for a multimodal person. His expression to me was that that might just be like a part-time person though, because most of their job would end up just being lobbying the county and the state for things that we wouldn't really be able to control. So that's something that we can talk about a little bit as we move forward, because I know that that multi-layer bureaucracy thing that we always deal with is a potential challenge there. As far as EV infrastructure on city property, I know that we did talk about that in the last budget cycle. Is that also something that we're taking a look at this year?
And what did you say again?
Oh, I'm sorry, EV infrastructure on city property, electric vehicle charging stations?
We have that under discussion. We haven't made a decision as to whether we can afford to do that yet. Currently we only have one electric vehicle, as I understand.
At the town center?
Well,
or you mean
for us? But we were not looking. That's not one of our primary objectives for the budget right now, to identify electric stations elsewhere in the city. We can discuss that during the budget process and take a look at it in the preliminaries here.
My understanding is that the electrical vehicle charging stations we're talking about wouldn't necessarily be exclusively for the use of city vehicles, right, but would be to encourage and promote, EV vehicles among the broader population.
That's correct.
Something we can bring up.
I mean, that's correct, and we'd have to take a look at how much that costs and all that.
Okay, I appreciate that. If you could definitely add that to the discussion of this budget session, I'd appreciate that. For the styrofoam recycling bin program, recycling the styrofoam, I know the Green Team brought up ideas about larger bins that we could potentially put in various locations, but even if we just started something as simple as collecting styrofoam here at City Hall, I think that could be something we could do fairly easily and fairly cheaply. So I'd appreciate if staff could look into that for us. And then on the recycling education front, Una's team did a really great video on the county recycling program recently. I learned a couple things watching that. So they've already started some of that good outreach, and if we could just have Una continue to do outreach in that vein about educating residents on how to recycle properly so we can get our contamination rates down a little bit, that'd be really wonderful. They're already started off really great. I appreciate your time, Mr. City Manager. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Well, I would like to take a moment just to make sure that everyone is aware, as you know, February is Black History Month. And as you may or may not be aware, we had a competition, a contest for our kids for Martin Luther King holiday, but because of inclement weather, we weren't able to have it on that day. And so coming this Saturday, the 8th, is that correct, Awilda? We will be able to have that day where the kids will come in from all around the city who participated and be able to receive their certificates, as well as we'll announce the winners. And so I would just ask that all of the citizens, if you can, to support our kids, to come out and make sure we let them know that we support them in wanting to see a better world for all of us. Awilda, do you have what time that is?
I believe it starts at 10, from 10 to 11:30.
10 a.m. here in the City Hall, correct? Okay. All right. Any other business before we close out?
I think we had item C from the consent agenda to discuss real quick, Mr. Mayor.
Item C.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
You're fine, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Could we just ask Mr. Mayor for staff to give us a quick update on item C and expand a little bit on it, and then just open it up for discussion?
Okay.
We can, Mr. Mayor, City Council, as you all know, staff's latest has an assignment to build a 2-sheet ice rink at Church Road site. During the permit process with the county, it became, well, thank you. It became apparent that the traffic situation on Church Road had become an impediment to the entire process of permitting. And the county, in a backwards thought, because we had already gone through the traffic analysis associated with that property. But soon after the young fellow was unfortunately killed, they came to us and said, well, we want a traffic light at Fairview Vista intersection and Church Road, and made it a condition of the permit process. So therefore, we added that to the construction process and the permit process. And the way that we plan to manage that is to use a payment in lieu of $250,000. The construction cost of the traffic signal and all of its support requirements is about $500,000. We would pay the county this fee. The county would install the traffic signal at the intersection. And since hundreds of our residents live on or around Church Road, I believe one or two of you all up there do, therefore, all of our residents would, in fact, benefit from the safety protections of that traffic signal. And so therefore, as a part of the direction to build an ice rink and to go through the permit process, I submitted this for consideration on the consent agenda. I intend to take the money from my contingency account so that we don't burden the construction project in particular. And since this is a traffic signal that will benefit our residents, it seemed right and proper that it could be funded from the general fund also. And that's the purpose of this issue.
So I have a question, Mr. Mayor, if I can.
Yes, go ahead.
So Mr. City Manager, just so I understand, so this is about us contributing $250,000 towards the construction of a traffic signal on Church Road?
Yes.
Okay, that we're paying to DPI. Okay.
Yes.
So just wanted to get my views on the record. I think independent of our thoughts on any other projects going on Church Road, I think that anything we can do to contribute to improving the safety of Church Road is an absolute unmitigated good thing. So I'm totally in favor of us moving forward with making this contribution to DPI. And that's all I have.
Ingrid, did you have a comment? Or nothing?
Mr. City Manager, quick question. Church Road is not a street owned by the city, correct? Or is it?
That's correct. It's a county road. It's a county right-of-way.
So we're paying $250,000 for traffic mitigation on a county road.
You could say that, but it's a county road that hundreds of our residents in that district use.
Yeah, correct. Okay.
Thousands, maybe. I think including the mayor there.
If we're ready, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to accept the ordinance.
They're gonna pay.
Second.
She said, give me a second.
Discussion? Okay, I didn't know if anyone said. All right, it's been moved and properly second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to adjourn.
Second.
I wish I could have seconded that.
All in favor?
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Motion carries. Hey, thank you everyone for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.